For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global, and welcome to our signature show, The Gist, on foreign affairs and security. Hi, I'm Surya Gangadharan, and welcome again to The Gist. My guest for this evening is Ambassador TCA Raghavan. He was India's High Commissioner to Pakistan from June 2013 to 2015. Ambassador, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our focus is on Pakistan, specifically Pakistan's role, the relationship with the Taliban, and that's what we're going to try and get from Ambassador Raghavan. So, how would you define Pakistan's role over the last year, especially now that they are sitting there in Kabul?
Well, the Pakistanis have never made a secret of the fact that the architecture which was established in Afghanistan post 9/11 was one to their liking, and they would put it in terms of the fact that that power was not distributed evenly, the government was not inclusive, but basically they felt excluded from the new setup in Afghanistan. And what was very evident was that they were not reconciled to that new setup and were doing what they could to change it. And I think in the past few years, those efforts intensified and to a great extent have been successful.
Would you say the Pakistani hold of the Taliban is absolute? I mean, they had a lot of issues in the past, including on the Durand Line. So, how would you, define that relationship?
Well, neighboring countries, and Afghanistan and Pakistan are neighboring countries. Neighboring countries always have an interface which is full of frictions, and Afghanistan and Pakistan are no different. There are any number of issues. One of them, of course, is the Durand Line, but there are many other issues on which they have different and often conflicting perspectives. Because there are ethnic spreads on both sides of the Durand Line, that itself leads to a huge amount of tension and friction. There are numerous other issues pertaining to, for instance, water and so on and so forth. So, in that sense, a government in Afghanistan and a government with Pakistan will face the same set of dilemmas which any neighboring country relationships throw up. But the Taliban, when out of power, certainly depended to a considerable extent on Pakistan and on Pakistani territory for sanctuaries, for support, for medical treatment, and so on. And I think to that extent, in the early phase, that relationship will be one of dependence, but gradually it will wear off. And the normal pattern of a neighboring country relationship, and in fact, the friction ridden history of Afghanistan Pakistan relations from 1947 onwards, that will gradually start asserting itself.
So, where do you believe Pakistan's priorities in Afghanistan would currently lie? What is it that they would want to prioritize over anything else right now?
Well, as I said, one of their principal concerns was that they felt excluded from the power structure post 9/11, and they felt that as a neighbor of Afghanistan, which had done a great deal for Afghanistan over the years, and especially after 1979 and after 1989, they were not being given their due place in Afghanistan's external relations. So one of their priorities is obviously to correct that, To what extent they will go in seeking to correct that, because where your due place in external affairs in Afghanistan's external relations ends and where a Pakistani hegemonic approach begins is quite difficult to separate. But certainly, it's something which all Afghans have always been sensitive about. But certainly, I think one of the main priorities of the Pakistanis would be that their role as a very important neighbor of Afghanistan should be reasserted and recognized. Uh, Another priority, and this is related to the first issue which I mentioned, but in fact has a certain independence of its own, was that the Pakistanis felt that their exclusion from power relationships in Afghanistan was animated and symbolized by the footprint which India had come to establish. And the Indian presence was deeply resented, as it to many Pakistanis, or perhaps to most Pakistanis, symbolized everything which was wrong with the architecture which was established in Kabul post 9/11. So, reducing the Indian footprint it was certainly a very important priority also.
All that ideas we've heard from Pakistan about Afghanistan as a strategic depth area and all that. Do those things still apply? Is it still something which the Pakistanis obsess about or are concerned about?
I think the strategic depth idea was aired in the 90s, and the term and the terminology acquired a certain life of its own. It's not employed in that sense, or rarely employed in that sense, to my knowledge, in Pakistan today. People may think in those terms, but it's rarely put across in those terms, because the fact is that since the 90s, the situation in Afghanistan has changed a great deal, and so has the situation in Pakistan. Because if strategic depth, in the way that concept was used, was that this was an area because of the ethnic overlap between Pashtun tribes on both sides of the Durand line, therefore Pakistan could shift assets, could use that as a ground, use Afghanistan territory as a place to consolidate itself. I think all of that has now, to a great extent, been thrown out of the window because of the very difficult situation which Pakistan faced in the first decade of this century in the tribal areas. I think they are much more conscious of the blowback which can come from Afghanistan. So rather than see it as a area or a territory of strategic depth, it is also a territory and an area which has to be viewed by them very carefully in terms of a site from which threats could emerge for Pakistan itself. But there is certainly one view in Pakistan, and there is also a certain approach in Pakistan and a certain operational strategy in Pakistan, that you can use militant groups for achieving political objectives vis-a-vis India in particular. And if at one stage it was difficult for Pakistan to keep these groups in their own country or in their own territory, it made sense to shift them into parts of Afghanistan where there was no clear writ of any government or of the Afghan government in place. So in that sense, Afghan territory had its convenient uses. But as I said, we should see these things in perspective and not exaggerate it out of. I think Pakistan's principal view of Afghanistan is a political one, which is that it is a neighbor which should have a very close relationship with Pakistan. And the way the Pakistanis define closeness is almost as if it's a near hegemonic relationship, that Afghanistan cannot be opposed to Pakistan. And because they feel they have done a great deal for Afghanistan over the years and so on. and that inevitably leads to a kind of pushback from Afghans of all political hues. And that is the natural relationship which will assert itself as time progresses.
You talked about blowback a little earlier. This whole thing about the TTP, being getting a new life because you now have the Taliban sitting in Kabul. Would this be a concern in Pakistan? I'm pretty sure it must be.
I'm sure it is a concern. How much of a concern it is, it's difficult to say because there are different voices which come out on this in Pakistan. I think certainly the group such as the TTP and others will feel a sense of being emboldened or a sense of triumphalism because of the Taliban victory. And that is something which is not in Pakistan's interest. That view will be there. But alongside it, there will be the much more immediate gains which have been secured in Pakistan's perspective by a group to which they are very close coming to power, the Indian footprint being reduced. So threats such as the TTP or the TTP acquiring new ambitions, I think those are more in the medium and longer term, and the view will be that we can deal with this when we come to it. But right now we have secured immediate strategic gains. And in that sense, the trade-off, possibly if such things are discussed, that could be the kind of trade-off which would have been in people's mind.
No, it's often been said of the Pakistanis that they are very good in terms of how they handle a tactical, mission, operation, or whatever. Afghanistan is far more than that. I mean, what they've done to help the Taliban is huge, isn't it? What would be the pitfalls here in terms of how they, where they could go wrong, in handling this set of this Taliban leadership in Kabul?
Well, it's a risky strategy, and it was also in pursuing that strategy. It was a very risky tactic because they were doing it. They did so knowing the risks involved with the United States and with and their own rocky relationship with the United States in the past decade. But obviously, they felt that with China's support and the fact that their priorities with regard to Afghanistan were so important, they decided to take those risks. Now, having secured their immediate political gains, what this means in the future is less clear. Because, as I said, there is a natural pattern in Afghanistan Pakistan relations which will assert itself. Secondly, in achieving this success, they have risked a great deal of Western displeasure. And while the relationship with China is there, and in the present situation, it's not as if the Pakistanis have acted alone, but there's been a certain tacit approval from Iran, from Russia, and perhaps from others also. But nevertheless, there is a certain risk, or more than a risk, of Western displeasure and opprobrium. And that can work to Pakistan's disadvantage in terms of its economy, its trade, its financial flows, etc. Now, the problem in Pakistan is that when these risks or when these trade-offs are balanced, there is a somewhat limited view taken of national interest. And now this is not a point specific to Afghanistan, but this is generally part of the problem of the strategic mindset in Pakistan, where national security and national interest are seen as more or less the same things.
Yeah.
In countries with a longer democratic tradition, national interest means a whole lot of things apart from security. It means employment, it means your economy, it means the perception of your country globally, it means your economic growth and so on. But in Pakistan, because it's been a highly securitized mindset over the years, because of Pakistan's own peculiar history, this equation of national security and national interest leads to major problems. And I envisage that the use of the Taliban to secure these battlefield gains and bring about political change will be uh, will lead to problems for Pakistan in the future as it deals with its other major economic partners.
The fact that China now has a direct link to the Taliban, the US, of course, did it much earlier. Iran is talking directly to them, they even give them shelter. Russia has its own links. These all tend to devalue or perhaps bring down Pakistan's importance or relevance.
I don't think so. I think different countries pursued their interests in different ways. The United States pursued a dialogue with the Taliban, uh, which led finally to the Doha Agreement, basically to ensure a safe withdrawal for its personnel from Afghanistan. They had no other interests apart from the fact that they wanted to secure a safe withdrawal. The Russians, the Iranians, and to some extent the Chinese saw uh, a relationship with the Taliban or a tacit approval for what the Taliban was doing, I think in larger strategic terms, as uh, as this constituting a major strategic setback for the United States. I think each of these countries has their own views
Yeah.
about the Taliban and the risks from the Taliban unless it is, uh, embedded in a set of relationships which I think they see those risks certainly. But the larger strategic gain of giving a pushback and a strategic defeat to the West and to the United States in particular, I think overshadows the other risks. Those can be handled in due course. For Pakistan, the Taliban was the instrument to bring about a change because, as I said, they felt excluded from the system which had been set up in Afghanistan, and they felt greatly perturbed that the Indian footprint should expand so quickly while they have virtually no presence. So different countries followed different sets of interests.
How do you think the Pakistanis will respond if the Taliban in the next perhaps weeks or months reaches out to India? Because at the end of the day, they have no money. I don't think they have any money at all. Pakistan can't give them finances. A lot of their funds are locked up overseas. Um, what happens if there is an outreach at this early stage?
It's very difficult to predict because a lot will depend on how what kind of judgment calls the Pakistani leadership makes. If they are mature and, as I said, they take an overall view of the national interest, they would go along with such steps because they realize that India can bring to the table in Afghanistan certain deliverables which the Afghans need and to some extent have got used to in terms of thousands of students studying here and various other developmental um, relationships which they have had with India. Whether the Pakistanis will see it or not, in that way, I don't know. But
Yeah.
right now, there is a sense of triumphalism, almost of gloating in many circles in Pakistan. And I think we have to wait for that to settle down to see whether they will take measured and reasonable judgments.
And in your view, could we have handled things differently? Because we've invested. There's a lot of criticism that we've invested so much there, and for what? I mean, could we have handled things differently?
Well, in my view, we have a wrong perception about our investments because the use of the term investments suggests a kind of financial investment or a commercial investment on which we have to get a return.
Return.
What we did was try to upgrade the Afghanistan economy and the human resources development potential of the current generation in terms of students and people going to universities and so on. And I think that is an investment which is has far more value than any transactional relationship which could have been forged. And I think one factor is the high prestige and image associated with India as a benign developmental partner, and that is there to stay. Nothing can change that. It's always been palpable in Afghanistan. So I don't think we should be worried about the investment we made. I think the investment or the money you put in is money well spent. Could we have handled it better? I think we have to be realistic in this. There is a great deal of discussion about this. That should we have reached out to the Taliban? Could we have prevented this turn of events which led to the closure of our mission? I think if we are realistic, we should understand that it was an external impulse post 9/11 which catapulted us back into Afghanistan after having been excluded from there. We had nothing to do with that external impulse. It came from outside. And it's a similar external impulse which has led to our exit from Afghanistan today. There is a Pakistan-Afghanistan dynamic. There is a Afghanistan-US dynamic. And there's a larger regional and international dynamic in terms of China, Iran, Russia, and so on. It's a combination of all these factors which led to the situation as it developed. It had very little to do in terms of an Afghanistan-India dynamic.
Yeah.
So I don't think we could have done anything to have really changed this course of events in any significant way.
Mm-hmm. So in that sense, wait and watch would be the best way forward.
Yeah. So strategic, wait and watch and exercising patience are, postures which nobody likes because they give the impression that you're doing nothing except sitting on your hands and waiting. But often there are situations where that is the mature and right judgment call to take. I think given the events which have taken place, which have surprised everybody, and it's a very significant change that in a matter of a few days, you have a whole system which was established over 20 years just being rolled up and it disappearing. I think it's a very significant change. So in this context, it is good if we wait and watch and see what our options are and what are the opportunities which will come up. We have enormous strengths and enormous capacities to play a role in Afghanistan, but we have to wait for the right opportunities for those strengths to come into play.
On that note, Ambassador Raghavan, thank you for your perspective and insight. And I'm sure as we developments in Afghanistan roll on, we'll probably have to pick up the threads once again sometime ahead in the future. Thank you again very much.
Thank you.
And for all of you out there, keep continuing to watch us on our website, on social media. Follow us with your comments and observations, and of course your questions. We welcome them. Thank you and good night.